Melissa Gilbert breaks silence about Dean Butler. She was 15. He was 23. And for nearly 50 years, millions of fans watched their on-screen kiss and called it the sweetest love story on television. But in late 2025, Melissa Gilbert finally said the words fans never expected to hear from her, and it changed the way an entire generation looks back at Little House on the Prairie. What did she actually say? Why did it take her decades to say it? And how did her own co-star respond when the internet came looking for answers? Stick around, because this story is not the fairy tale you remember. For most of the 1970s and early 1980s, Melissa Gilbert was one of the most recognizable faces on American television. She played Laura Ingalls, the spirited, dirt-kneed daughter of a poor farming family making their way across the American frontier. The show followed the Ingalls family through sickness, poverty, natural disasters, and quiet moments of everyday love, and it became appointment viewing for families across the country. Gilbert was only about 9 years old when she landed the role, and she stayed with the series for 9 seasons, growing up in real time in front of an audience that felt like they were raising her right alongside her television parents. Long before any of that, though, Melissa Gilbert's life had already taken a few unusual turns. She was born in Los Angeles in 1964 and adopted as an infant by actor and comedian Paul Gilbert and dancer Barbara Crane. Growing up in a showbiz household meant that auditions, film sets, and cameras were part of her everyday world well before she understood what any of it meant. By the time she was a young child, she was already booking commercials, and her audition for Little House on the Prairie would end up changing the entire direction of her life. The man who shaped that direction the most wasn't a director or a network executive. It was Michael Landon, the show's star, executive producer, and the actor who played her father, Charles Ingalls. Gilbert has spoken for years about how Landon became something like a real father figure to her, especially as her own parents' marriage fell apart during the years she was filming the show. He was protective of her, he mentored her as a performer, and by most accounts he took his responsibility toward his young cast seriously, on camera and off. That relationship matters a great deal to understanding what came next, because it was Landon who wrote and produced the storyline that would eventually bring Dean Butler into Laura Ingalls' world. Dean Butler joined the cast in the show's 6th season as Almanzo Wilder, the young farmer who becomes Laura's love interest and, later, her husband. At the time, Butler was 23 years old. Melissa Gilbert was 15. Almanzo, based on the real historical figure from Laura Ingalls Wilder's writings, was roughly 10 years older than Laura in real life, and the show leaned into that same age gap for its storyline. For decades, that detail was treated as a quirky bit of trivia about the source material, a minor historical footnote buried underneath one of television's most beloved courtships. Audiences at the time weren't thinking about the years between the two actors. They were watching a shy farm girl fall for a steady, dependable young man, and the show sold that romance as wholesome, earnest, and deeply American. What audiences didn't see, and what nobody was really talking about at the time, was what it actually felt like for a 15-year-old actress to be asked to perform romantic scenes, including an on-screen first kiss, opposite a man 8 years older than her. That is the part of the story Melissa Gilbert has only recently begun to describe in her own words, and it's a very different picture than the one that aired on NBC decades ago. In November of 2025, Gilbert posted a message on social media that caught many longtime fans off guard. She shared an old photo from a vacation and used it to point out something she said felt almost impossible to reconcile, that the same young girl in that picture was, around that same period of her life, expected to convincingly play a woman in love with and kissing a much older man on national television. She described looking back at it now, through the lens of today's conversations about protecting children in the entertainment industry, as something that felt shocking. She was blunt about her age at the time, stating plainly that she was 15, and she credited her mother and Michael Landon with making sure she was looked after during that period, while also noting that not every young performer in her position has had that kind of protection. It wasn't the first time Gilbert had touched on the discomfort of that storyline. In her earlier memoir, Prairie, published back in 2009, she had already written candidly about how anxious she felt heading into that first kiss scene with Butler. She described not wanting to be seen as anything other than a kid at that point in her life, and admitted the whole idea of a romantic storyline made her deeply uneasy before filming even began. That book covered plenty of ground beyond the show itself, including her relationships, her struggles with body image, and her experiences with substance use later in life. But the discomfort around that early romantic arc was always part of her account of those years. What made the November 2025 post land so differently wasn't that the information itself was new. Fans who had read her memoir already had some sense of how she felt at the time. What changed was the tone and the timing. Gilbert wasn't reflecting quietly in a book chapter anymore. She was speaking directly, in real time, on a platform where millions of former fans could see it immediately, and she was doing so at a moment when public conversations about how child actors were treated decades ago have become far more common and far more critical. Her comments arrived alongside a broader wave of former child stars from that era revisiting their own experiences with fresh eyes, asking harder questions about what was normalized on set in the name of good television. Dean Butler didn't stay quiet for long either. Just weeks after Gilbert's post, he sat down for an episode of a podcast marking the show's 50th anniversary, alongside another former castmate, Allison Arngrim, who played Nellie Olson. Butler addressed the age gap directly, acknowledging that the situation wasn't easy for either of them at the time. He talked about how differently something like that would be handled today, and pointed out that back then, the age difference between a 23-year-old and a 15-year-old wasn't treated with nearly the scrutiny it would receive now. He also praised Gilbert's professionalism as a young actress, describing how she stepped into an incredibly difficult assignment and did the best she could with what she was asked to do. Butler had actually already opened up about the age gap earlier in his own 2024 memoir titled Prairie. In that book, he described the tension around filming those early romantic scenes, including a moment where Gilbert's mother became visibly upset watching a scene be filmed, upset enough that Michael Landon called for a break. Butler described that reaction as a kind of protective instinct from a mother who wasn't entirely comfortable with what her daughter was being asked to perform. He's also spoken publicly about wishing, in hindsight, that the two of them had been closer in age when they were cast together, even while acknowledging that historically Almanzo really was about a decade older than Laura in real life. So, what does all of this actually tell us about what Melissa Gilbert has revealed? It isn't a hidden secret romance. It isn't a scandalous confession about her private feelings for Dean Butler off camera. What she has done, more than anything, is give herself permission to describe what that period of her career actually felt like from the inside, without the soft focus of nostalgia smoothing over the discomfort. She has been fairly consistent over the years in saying that her relationship with Butler was professional and respectful, and that he never made her feel unsafe or disrespected during filming. What she's added, more recently and more pointedly, is a willingness to say clearly that being 15 and being asked to romantically perform opposite an adult man was, in her words, something that looked shocking through today's eyes, no matter how gently it was handled at the time. That distinction matters. This isn't a story about two co-stars turning on each other or airing decades of resentment. Both Gilbert and Butler have continued to speak about each other with warmth and respect. Butler has repeatedly praised her talent and her professionalism as a very young actress handling emotionally complicated material. Gilbert, for her part, has never suggested that Butler behaved inappropriately toward her. What she's challenging is not the man, but the system and the norms of an industry that thought nothing of writing that kind of storyline for a teenage actress in the first place, and an audience that never questioned it because nobody was really asking those questions yet. It's worth stepping back and remembering just how much Melissa Gilbert's life has unfolded since her days in Walnut Grove. After the show ended, she took on a range of television and stage roles, trying to build an identity separate from Laura Ingalls, which is never an easy task for anyone who became famous as a child. She has been open in her writing about the pressure she felt in the years that followed to look a certain way in Hollywood, about undergoing cosmetic procedures as a young woman, and later about choosing to reverse some of those choices as she got older, publicly framing that decision as reclaiming control over her own body rather than chasing an industry standard. She has written 2 memoirs, Prairie Tale and the more recent Back to the Prairie, the second of which focuses on her life today, living a much quieter existence away from the spotlight. Her personal life has also been well documented, including a long relationship with actor Rob Lowe during her teenage years, marriages to actor Beau Brinkman and later actor Bruce Boxleitner, and her current marriage to actor and director Timothy Busfield. She briefly ran for Congress in Michigan in 2016 before stepping back from the campaign for health reasons. Through all of it, she has increasingly positioned herself as someone willing to talk honestly about the messier, less flattering parts of growing up famous, rather than only offering fans the nostalgic version of her story. That's really the context in which her recent comments about Dean Butler and their age gap should be understood. This isn't a woman rewriting history or suddenly turning against a former co-star. It's a woman in her 60s looking back at a girl in braids and a sunbonnet and choosing to describe, honestly, what that girl was actually asked to do, and how strange it looks now compared to how normal it felt at the time. Dean Butler, for his part, hasn't run from the conversation either. He's acknowledged the discomfort, defended the professionalism both of them brought to an uncomfortable assignment, and continued to speak highly of the young actress he worked alongside. Maybe that's the real story here. Not a secret romance finally exposed, and not some falling out between two television legends, but something a little more grounded and a little more human. Two people who spent years pretending to be in love on camera as children of the era's storytelling conventions. Now, decades later, telling the truth about what that actually cost one of them. Melissa Gilbert didn't break her silence to hurt anyone. She broke it because she finally felt ready to say, out loud, that being 15 and performing a grown woman's romance for a national audience wasn't the innocent moment of television magic it was sold as at the time. What do you think about Melissa Gilbert's recent comments, and how audiences today are re-examining shows they grew up loving? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing for more honest looks at the stories behind the shows we thought we already knew.